Well, there's little doubt that we've just witnessed an election budget. Could be coming up any old time now, with plenty of goodies across tax reform, spending and policy. But Morgan Stanley says that the federal budget is unlikely to kickstart property prices or buyer confidence. Yeah, we've got property prices continuing to grind down, as they've been saying. And Anna Porter's from Suburbanite. She's here to look at the impact on the housing market. Buyers, investors, whoever you might be out there, where's something for everyone in the budget. What stands out to you from a property perspective, Anna?
So the first thing that stands out to me is the fact that they keep talking about returning to a surplus, and even though that might not have a direct impact on property, it does impact sentiment. So when people hear these positive things coming out of budgets or out of the economy in generally, sentiment catches on pretty quickly. The other thing that I think is a really interesting space with this is they haven't done anything radical. They haven't thrown a big grant out at first home buyers. They haven't thrown a big change in the policy space. What they've done is they've actually looked at stability, and stability I think is exactly what the property market needs right now. We don't need bells and whistles and the razzle-dazzle of something like that. The property market needs good stability, which comes through job creation and infrastructure, and a really interesting support package through that small business sector, which are a big part of the property market, small business owners. So I think there's some really interesting things coming out of that will look very stable, which is boring, but it's really important.
Yeah, we talk a lot about the access to credit factor. Obviously, that doesn't really come into play when we're talking about the federal budget. But as you say, they could have helped out certain parts of the market. It seems like they haven't really picked on first-home buyers or anyone like that. I mean, you talk a little bit about infrastructure, and I wonder how quickly those sorts of things start getting acted upon. You know, we hear about maybe a faster rail network going through certain parts of the country. Do you think that people act on those sorts of things pretty quickly and try to jump into those areas?
We get a lot of people that say, I'm land banking because I heard something's being built somewhere sometime in the next 35 years. Very speculative. But it certainly does, and I think what we're seeing out of this is some of the regional markets seem to be a big winner, which again will boost that sentiment around it as well. You did talk about access to finance, and there's one thing that I heard, there's a lot of information came out very quickly, but I heard them talking about a $2 billion finance sort of lending fund to support small business. And I think there's going to be a flow-on effect from that, because small business right now, if you want to grow your small business, you leverage against your home loan and your house funds it, right? When small business owners, really what they'd prefer to do is have access to better funding to grow their business and then be able to use their home loan to actually buy a bigger home, go and invest or do something more in the property space. And sometimes this becomes crippling when they're using basically their home loan becomes their overdraft facility for their business. If they can free up some funding, and the devil's going to be in the detail here. They said something as simple as there'll be $2 billion dedicated to helping small business get funding. I mean, what does that tell us? But if the devil in the detail's right, I think there'll be a really interesting flow-on effect there, and that's what I'm really excited about.
Yeah, so road and rail projects in terms of the infrastructure package worth about $100 billion. Yes. I think Shane, who we just spoke to from AMP Capital, is a little worried there wasn't enough stimulus in there. And although, as you said, it's good to... I just wonder what people are going to be clinging on to. Yes, we've got this projected surplus in terms of the confidence factor that you just mentioned. Yes, we've got the projected surplus, back in the black. I'd see they're trying to get back in black trending on social media. People might have seen that story today.
Though, right?
Yeah, it didn't quite get the coverage they were hoping for. I think they're trying to get that side of it going, but from what Shane was saying, there's not quite enough in the near term to change. I'm thinking buyers going out in the market and thinking prices are still dropping. There's nothing going to change their minds about the fact that prices are dropping, loans are still hard to come by.
Prices are dropping in some states though.
Some
They're dropping
states,
in some and definitely not in others. Well, the big ones, the powerhouses, right? So, look, there is certainly that. So they're talking about the fast rail going from Sydney to Wollongong, Brisbane to Sunshine Coast, Melbourne to Geelong, and a number of regional areas were listed. Couple that, especially in that regional space, with the upgrades to the regional hospitals was a big point. And then you throw in as well the drought package. I think regional Australia is going to be a winner out of this, and I think that is one that we should start to see. You know, there's a light at the end of the tunnel there. Even just having some promises made, I think, will be positive. And a lot of Australians, when it comes to property, get really speculative and get well ahead of themselves and start jumping into regional markets and buying well before they know enough information to do it properly.
Sure.
So I actually think that might be a positive thing for those markets. When it comes to the big markets like your Sydneys and your Melbournes, we're putting a fast rail between Sydney and Wollongong in years to come, not tomorrow.
Yeah, and if this government is in power for like and
well,
wins how many elections.
Yeah, so...
Will it be a game changer? Not today. I don't think it will be today.
Yeah, just on that point of sentiment and about, you know, what happens next, we've got the budget reply coming up. So when it comes to sentiment, you've got this government talking about, you know, you were saying it's all about stability, we're not going to, you know, try anything crazy, we're not going to throw anything really wild at this situation. Then potentially you've got the opposition sticking to, you know, quite significant changes that will affect the property market. How do you think property investors and owner-occupiers are likely to be looking towards the next election now?
So a property investor, potentially a small business owner or a household that's going to get their extra $1,000 back. And let's be honest, $1,000 a year is not going to turn you into a property investor or someone's going to upgrade your home loan by $500,000 overnight. But these people are going to go to their taxman, their accountant at the end of tax year, and with one government, they're going to get more money back through tax and still have negative gearing on the table. Or with the other government, potentially they're not going to get the extra tax back unless that's a policy that comes out, but they're also going to have negative gearing taken off the table, which means you get back more on this side and you potentially don't get back as much on this side. So there's going to be some decisions made around that because that is real money in real people's pockets at the end of every year. And that's a decision maker for people. You know, we don't think about how does the budget affect everyone else. Let's be honest, people are selfish. They think, how's the budget going to affect me? Yeah. That's
absolutely.
How Australians think.
Sounds like you're going to get lots of calls tomorrow from people.
Yeah, look, definitely are.
You do get, yeah, you get that, right? Well, you'd have to say not much in the housing front when it comes to the budget. I think there's $1.7 billion for affordable housing that was kind of repledged, but really few new measures. It's all about sentiment and
the aged care one I thought was interesting. Though.
Yeah. Okay.
So they've touched on aged care
just quickly because we've got to move on.
But very quickly. So aged care is a sector that ties up the housing market. A lot of old people live in houses, you know, for lack of a better word, but a lot of our ageing population live in houses that they're tying up stock that's too big for their needs. This government has said they're going to put a lot of money into that, but they're focused on in-home care packages with rolling out about 10,000 new ones of those. They're not actually taking people out of their homes into aged care facilities because it's cheaper for them not to do that. Yes. But at the end of the day, that's not going to free up housing stock. So it's still going to create that supply and demand issue that we've had for a long time in the major capital cities. That hasn't been addressed. So I don't think that's going to change the supply and demand issue.
Interesting. Couple of issues interesting in there. Thank you so much, Anna Porter from Suburbanite. That's the impact on the property market. And stick with us because still in this budget special, we've got the changes that might affect your business. So listen up if that's you. That's right after this break.
Plus, we get into all the weirdest and wackiest costs in the budget.
We'd have to say on the list of winners this evening from the budget, small business seems to be cropping up on lists all over the place. MYOB CEO Tim Reid is with us from Canberra. Do you declare this a win for small business, Tim? What do you think?
Tim, just wondering if you think that this is a win for small business all up.
This was a great budget for small business. It was a great budget for a number of reasons. Small businesses prosper when the economy prospers, and what we saw tonight was a budget that was delivered on the back of a strong economy, a budget that is going to be balanced and pay down debt over the next 10 years, which is important because to build confidence we need to have an understanding of what's going to drive the nation forward. So that was great. It was great because of the income tax cuts that are being moved forward. Small business owners care about their employees and many of their employees will receive those, but it also means that there's going to be more money in the wallets of their customers. And that's very important in terms of running a small business. And of course then there were the specific initiatives around small businesses with the increase in the instant asset write-off, the increase in the eligibility for the instant asset write-off, so more businesses will be able to claim more money back under that initiative. And I think really importantly also a number of announcement around skills and equipping the workforce for the future. So it's hard to sit back there if you really care about small business and care about our nation and not think that this was a really strong budget.
Yeah, so specifically on the expanded tax write-off scheme, because that does seem the one that people are honing in on. I mean, one thing I notice is that, you know, the goalposts have changed again. I don't think that people necessarily complain, but one of the problems with the way that governments treat small business is no one ever knows who's a small business and who isn't, because it's just changing all the time. I mean, I guess we get no greater clarity on that front necessarily today, but look, I guess it's a good thing to see that the expansion all over.
Yeah, absolutely. So the expansion in the instant asset write-off is a good thing, and it does keep moving. You're absolutely right. It's moved up from $20,000 to $25,000. But let's not forget that when this government came to power, it was sitting down, I think from memory, around $3,000, maybe $5,000. It is somewhat frustrating, I will say, that it has to be renewed every year, and it's not made a permanent feature of the economic settings for the nation. But look, the good news is that it's back, and it's back bigger and stronger than it's been in the past.
Yep.
Tim, you mentioned before education. A lot of people are saying that vocational training, TAFE, the ability to retrain and re-educate yourself are very important in the small business space. Are you seeing enough done there? Are you happy with what you're seeing?
Look, I think this is one of the national challenges that we face, and it is a significant challenge. There was some work done by the Business Council of Australia last year, and it honed in on the fact that jobs that change in terms of the task mix that is required, so jobs that continuously evolve and require people to be changing and learning new skills, are the safest jobs in the economy. And in fact, forced redundancies, retrenchments is down at a 15-year low and continuing to trend down. But when you break it down, jobs that haven't changed, jobs that don't require people to continue to build new skills and do new things, then they are now materially riskier than those where there's continuous task evolution. And that means we've got to rethink training, because the concept that someone gets trained, starts a profession and can then remain in that for life and feel secure in their employment is actually counter to all of the facts and statistics that are out there. So what we need is a system that allows people to dip in and dip out of training. And everyone has to play a part in that. The government needs to play a part in funding it. The educational institutions need to play a part in making it more flexible in the way in which people engage in that. And employers need to play a part in supporting their team members and their employees in participating in that. But it does start with the fact that the training is available.
Yeah, I mean, just got a minute left, Tim, but I guess two of the things I was thinking about heading into the budget. Business is always talking about the access to capital and funding as a major issue, and incentivise, this issue of incentivising businesses to employ people. We talk about this job creation, 1.25 million over how many years they're boasting about, but, small businesses, the big ones who employ people out there, right? Is there anything to incentivise small business to do more on that front in this budget?
Look, there was. So firstly, it's the upskilling of people, but secondly, there were specific incentives put in place to employ particularly the apprentices, the 80,000 extra apprentices that are qualified. I must say, though, over the next 30 years, I don't think our challenge is going to be creating enough jobs for the people. It's going to be making sure that the jobs that we create are high-value jobs, because unemployment is low, and when you look at the ageing population that we have, the percentage of the population working is going to shrink, and we've got to make sure those people are productive so that they can support the rest of the economy. And the one thing that I think was missing here was anything around research and development and really thinking about how do we attract those higher value jobs into the economy.
Oh, good point. I think I saw even the research and development tax incentive cut by about $1.35 billion over budget forward estimates, so a blow to startups. Yep. Another discussion that will continue there. Thank you so much. Tim Reid, MYOB CEO, busy night for you and your team, so thank you.
You're very welcome. Great to be with you.
All right, well, back in the black with a fistful of tax cuts, why the budget could make you richer.
And a $725 million investment for the elderly. Those details ahead.
Welcome back to Your Money Live's Budget Special. Now, we've been taking a look at the big ticket tax reforms outlined in the budget that you can, make you richer. To make you richer, yeah.
Some people will not be feeling richer, depending on who you are, whether you're winners or losers, and we'll look at some of those exact people coming up in a segment with Scott Phillips from Motley. Right now, we're joined by wealth coach Rebecca Pritchard in Melbourne, and also Gemma Dale's with us. She heads up investor behaviour at the NAB with us in Sydney to talk about how people might be cashing in on those budget sweeteners. Rebecca, first to you, what stands out?
Thanks for having me back, team. I think those offsets for pretty much the vast majority of Australians is exciting. Last year, a lot of people were left disappointed with that net impact for about $10 in your wallet each week. But we're talking between $20 and $40 a week now for singles and potentially for couples, which is a sizable difference when you consider the growing cost of living. You know, particularly this time of year, a lot of people have just had a hike on their health insurance. That money goes a long way.
Yeah, Gemma, Dale, just over to you now. We heard from Leo Shanahan a little earlier, and he described what they were doing in superannuation as just sort of tinkering around the edges. Do you see it that way, or do you think that what we've read here in the budget is significant?
It is very quiet on the superannuation front this year. So we've had many big years for superannuation. It's not a bad thing. You know, like people get really anxious about tinkering with super.
Yes.
And it's the frustration I hear most frequently from investors. It's like, please, could they just leave it alone till I get my head around it?
It's supposed to be long-term settings, and they just get fiddled with all the time.
Yeah, it changes a lot. So this year it's simply allowing older Australians, so those 66 and 67 from next year, so not immediately, to make contributions to their super without having to meet the work test, which makes a bit of sense. It's intended to align the age at which you can keep contributing to your super without still working with the pension age, which will be increasing to age 67, as we know, although that's a bit later. Okay. So it's giving people an opportunity to contribute for a little bit longer. Apart from that, not a lot happens. Okay.
So do you pile that in with tax changes and tax cuts, because they're going to be getting taxed at a lower rate? You know, does that just sort of add into the overall tax centrepiece? It
does. I mean, superannuation is very attractively taxed compared to everything else. So long as you're under your $1.6 million cap, you have a tax rate of 0 when you are retired. That's pretty nice. It's hard to compete with. Zero's about the best you're going to get. So for those who are nearing retirement, it's incredibly attractive. The biggest challenge for a lot of people is getting the money in. So long as you are under that cap, and if you're in that 67, 66 sort of age bracket, you can make contributions if this measure gets through. Very important point to make. $25,000 pre-tax, which is always lovely, so you can claim a deduction for that. That fits into the tax category. $100,000 post-tax, and they'll allow you to use the bring forward in those years as well, which is doing 3 years worth of contributions in 1 year. So all of those contributions that you make are then in the superannuation environment and taxed far more generously than they would be in your own name.
Rebecca Pritchard, you like to coach millennials in particular in your line of work. I know you do all sorts of money coaching, but for people, I mean, this is a point where people start to make calls. Now, what was in it for me, and what should I be doing now? What's your main advice to people? You know, if the government gets in and this is all legit, this is how it's all going to work out. What's one of your main takeaways you think for people that you speak with?
Well, first of all, I have to say on the superannuation front, not that we were expecting it, there was no leaks on this front, but I would have loved to see some changes to the contribution cap. As Gemma mentioned, it's only $25,000. So for a lot of millennials and Gen Xers, that's really not a lot of money if you perhaps have neglected your superannuation till later in life. So I'd love to see that perhaps pop up in future years. But I think for me, the big takeaway isn't so much that $20 to $40 each week, but it's actually the investment in healthcare. Because we talk about all the time, for most Australians, their number one asset is actually their ability to work. And if you can't work, whether it's physically or mentally, something has broken down, that really has a humongous impact on your finances both now and into the future if you compound that over time. So I think for me, the key takeaways are actually the investment in the healthcare system, whether it's on more affordable x-rays and ultrasounds, or the investment specifically in mental health, because if that can then improve the ability for millennials or for anyone to invest in their own health, that means they're more likely to earn an income, they're more likely to stay in the workforce and more likely to become financially free over time.
Rebecca, while we've got you, a little earlier in the evening, you and I were talking about tax and what people can do to improve their tax situation. I thought one of the particularly interesting things that the government's planning on doing is pumping $1 billion into the ATO with a view to get 3.6 back. It says that it's cracking down on dodgy accountants, tax advisors, things like that. Do you think that this is something that Australians need to be aware of, that they make sure, that the people that they're getting advice from are legitimate? I mean, is this a considerable problem on the ground, do you think?
Look, I'd like to say it's not a considerable problem, but in like so many areas, it pays to do your research, and you know, the financial advice has had a huge overhaul. We've gone through the ringer in terms of quality advice. So I think it's only fair that the accountants get shaken up as well, because I have no doubt that there's some people out there who are doing dodgy or less than admirable behaviour. So if the government are investing in the ATO to give them these powers to do a better job of that, ultimately I think that's a fantastic thing for the community. I also mentioned earlier tonight that I'm a big fan of the ATO app. So if the government again are continuing to invest in things like that, I think that's a win for everyone.
Hey, thank you so much, Rebecca Pritchard, Wealth Enhancers, and from the NAB, Gemma Dale. Thank you for checking in with us tonight. Up next, we'll talk about those winners and losers from the budget for 2019.
Plus, the millions set aside in the budget for ants. Yes, you heard that correctly.
There was hits and misses when it comes to industry funding in the budget, of course. Scott Phillips is Chief Investment Officer of Motley Australia. He's joining us with his insights. Scott, I'm going to keep it wide open for you. What caught your eye?
Yeah, good evening, guys. Look, you know, firstly, from the politics and the economics, this is very much a pre-election budget. As many of your guests and yourselves have commented, this is the beginning, the first salvo of you know, election 2019. We'll see the same, of course, from the opposition come Thursday night. And so that was the first thing. This is a very inoffensive budget, giving a lot away in a lot of different areas. No real negatives other than the occasional kind of jab at the usual kind of suspects. So very much a budget that is designed very clearly to say, hey, great economic management, B, tax cuts for almost everybody, and C, how about you vote for us in May? Unsurprising, of course, and frankly not a big swipe from me on that. That's just what you expect from politicians come this sort of part of the election cycle. Broadly speaking, economically, look, I really did like the increase in the tax offset for low to middle income earners. I think, you know, we've talked a lot about bracket creep and about bracket moves. And yes, there's some cuts planned for 2024. Maybe we'll get back to that. Maybe you won't, because frankly, that's 2 elections away. So we can always, you know, forget about that one. But for now, the money going back into the pockets of low and middle income earners, most of that money will be spent. And that's the really important thing for the economy. Again, heard some of your comments earlier, and Shane Oliver's comments from AMP about the stimulus in this budget, not a particularly stimulatory budget, but that money really, for most people in those brackets, will go straight back into the economy. So that's good for jobs, good for retail spending. I don't necessarily helps house prices, but pretty broadly across the board, a good result when it comes to the, I guess, the, you know, the need to keep the economy moving, and to whatever extent we need stimulus, that should provide it.
Sure, so some improvement to sentiment, some stimulus happening there. I mean, there was some specific stuff in there, Scott, about you know, help with the energy bill, things like that. When you look at that through the lens of an investor, I mean, do you think, ooh, okay, winner in the energy sector? You know, does anything here bear on what you're going to see for the rest of the week or for the rest of the year on the ASX? Do you think?
Yeah, Chris, tomorrow morning we probably will see an increase in share price of infrastructure stocks. The $100 billion infrastructure money being spent, that's the key one that's going to really grab people's attention. And rightly so. That's a very, very large amount of money. Trains everywhere across the country, according to Josh Frydenberg. We've got trains in Geelong to Melbourne. We've got them from the Sunshine Coast to Brisbane. We've got Sydney to Parkes and Orange and Dubbo and Bathurst and just about anywhere else you could name. So, you know, that'll be good news for infrastructure companies. I expect we'll see those probably do well tomorrow morning. Energy, look, not really, mate. There's not going to be a lot of change there. The fact it's a little bit easier to pay the bills doesn't really impact the companies themselves. So infrastructure is a big winner. The instant asset tax write-off announced for small businesses is a big one. That's going to increase from $25,000 to $30,000 and be ongoing. Look, you know, on a cynical note, that's kind of, you know, almost middle class welfare at some point, right? It becomes this permanent ability to simply spend up to 30 grand and write it off immediately. That being said, good news for the likes of Harvey Norman, JB Hi-Fi. Interestingly too, that really brings a whole lot of cars into the mix. So 25 grand, you could buy a decent, you know, small new car for 25 grand. Once you increase it to 30, a whole lot more come into that that sphere of influence. And so I wouldn't at all be surprised to see car dealers who frankly have been really struggling with new car sales over the last 6 months. They really should see some sort of pickup in sales. Again, remembering, of course, most of these, if not almost all of them, except for the energy kind of money you talked about earlier, Chris, that's all going to be post-election. And this is where this gets political. Now, the question, of course, is right now the coalition's still very much outsiders, $4.85 were the last odds I saw. That puts Labor at odds on. And so at some level, you've got to look at these two and say all of these promises, unless the opinion polls start to move pretty quickly and pretty significantly, that still remains the big question. So all of these measures, and again, that's why we've got to pay attention on Thursday night. All of these measures are, if we get elected, this is what we'll do. And so that's where attention turns next.
I did like that the infrastructure plan package was a nice round, big $100 billion as well. Don't you love politicians, the way they can do that and just get like that right number? And also,
Brooke, I'm going to pull a Dr. Evil out and say $100 billion.
Exactly.
That's about the way we're going.
And emotively, so that we can all be there for the school drop-off, which is what we all just hope in life to be able to do. Yes, said quite emotively in that speech tonight. Hey, Scott Phillips, thank you. I know we'll be seeking out your thoughts throughout tomorrow morning. Watch those stocks to see how people are judging it from an investment standpoint. Thank you very much. A few pointers as to what you might see tomorrow still to come. All the industry winners and losers from the budget.
And we're going to be talking about some of the weird and wacky things that might have been in the budget there. It's time now to take a look at some of these strange and surprising inclusions in this year's budget. Editor of yourmoney.com.au, Aleks Vickovich, joins us now. Aleks, thank you, and thank you for trawling through the budget papers. It's a pretty fat document.
You can't just Control-F weird stuff either, I found out. There was some serious journalistic sort of work that went into this.
Yeah, much appreciated. Well, what did stand out?
Yeah, and I've got to say, firstly, you know, I've criticised government waste at times in the past, but trawling through the budget documents, most of it did seem pretty above board, important stuff, a lot of health measures and so on. I know you've had a range of experts already going through the top line stuff, but we did think it was unusual that $9.2 million going towards controlling the yellow crazy ants in Queensland. Now, I don't know.
If you are a yellow crazy ant,
you're in trouble.
You are one of the winners for this budget. No, you're one of the losers for this budget.
One of the losers. You're going to be stamped out.
We're looking for
now,
losers,
I should say this could be a serious environmental problem in the areas where they could.
If you Google it, you can work it all out.
If so, I apologise. But the fact that they're called yellow crazy ants, I think, qualifies them to be in the weird stuff.
I think so.
In the budget.
Totally.
There's just a bunch of people out there, surely, who are just punching the air going, those absolute ants, we're coming for you, finally.
What else do you find?
Unbelievable.
All right, we've got $0.3 million, so a little $300,000 allocation to support the Australian Mini Football Federation, to support the Mini Football Federation World Cup, which is coming to Perth.
Now, hang on, we're talking soccer or AFL?
So this is 5, 6, 7 or 8-a-side soccer. It's very inclusive.
Thank you.
And so we thought that was an interesting one. And obviously we'll bring you all the news when that World Cup comes to Perth later in the year, we believe. $1 million flat to update the Flying Fish Cove master plan and undertake a review of tourism on Christmas Island. Now, we thought this is interesting given all the controversy around Christmas Island. You know, this has been a detention centre that this government has been committed to for some time. And, you know, I think also in this budget has announced they may be pulling out of come July. So interesting that it's now they've come around and they're investing in tourism in the area. So that'll be one to watch as well. This next one, $17.1 million over 3 years. And this is to basically deliver 1,000 hours of Australian television in the Pacific region. So this one's interesting because, of course, it depends exactly what content they're going to be putting out there. And hopefully it's not just done on ratings alone, because I don't know if the people of the Solomon Islands really need Married at First Sight. I don't know if that's the most pressing concern that they need. But, of course, they could also get your money, which would be fantastic for them, and help them, you know, grow, protect and enjoy their wealth, which would be fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah.
And finally, $1.5 million, or second last, $1.5 million to support the installation of a major light show in Tasmania as part of Mona's Dark Mofo Festival.
Nice.
Now, I don't know if you guys have been to this, but it's trending.
Although I think it's quite controversial down there in Hobart because it brings these, like, crowds and crowds of, of visitors that, caused quite havoc at the time.
I think the Museum of New and Old Art's a bit sort of controversial down there in general, polarises people. But the idea of Josh Frydenberg and Scott Morrison sitting in a room deciding that Dark Mofo was something that required allocation, I think just gives me the giggles. So hopefully we get some footage of that when they go down there and see it in practice. And one final one, which was an additional $4.3 million over 5 years for the Postal Industry Ombudsman Scheme. This is where you put in complaints about your posties. We thought this was interesting, considering that that's less than former CEO Ahmed Farouk earns in a year, of course. So hopefully not too many people are complaining about their posties. They do a great service. Lots of important things in the budget. Great show, but these are some of the more interesting ones to watch, I think.
The top complaint being that little slip that you get to say, we would deliver this post, in the post at 9 a.m, but, you're there at 9 a.m, they weren't there. That is the #1 complaint from what we get from this show, I reckon.
Absolutely.
We get contacted about that all the time.
All the time. Look, I was a big fan of the Ants. Also like the Pacific TV one. That's good. It was distressing how many people were still tweeting about Married at First Sight, despite the fact that the budget's happening right now. So yes, you're absolutely right about that.
Let's hope that's not our great export story to the Pacific.
Well, apparently it wasn't their most exciting episode, so I think we've seen a lot of people tune into the federal budget tonight. The government will be happy about that, and we'll see if disaffected Married at First Sight viewers make a difference in the upcoming election.
And what do you got on the website tonight, tomorrow? What's the plan?
Plenty of stuff. So yourmoney.com.au/budget 2019 is where you can get everything, all the highlights from today. The analysis, of course, continues into the night with Tiki, and then we'll have plenty more coming on tomorrow. So, plenty of time for people to digest exactly the more important and also some of the lighter things that have gone on in today's budget.
And as always, the promise, jargon-free with yourmoney.com.au. Thank you so much, Aleks, Vickovich, and to everyone that is a hater of those yellow ants. Well done to you tonight. You're amongst the winners. So that is our show for tonight. And as, of course, we just mentioned with Aleks there, we've got special programming coming up with Tiki Fullerton. So don't forget to tune into that. And, of course, right throughout the day tomorrow as well.
Yeah, we certainly do. We've got all the budget fallout coming up. We're also going to be talking about high-end home makeovers at a budget price. So make sure you tune in for Cherie Barber and James Treble, who are going to be answering your questions. Do make sure you join us tomorrow. Cheers.